Hello, and welcome to the second part of this week's three-part episode of KRAD COVID readings, as I, Keith R.A. DeCandido, read stuff to you to entertain you during the COVID-19 crisis. This is part 2 of the Ballad of Big Charlie, which appeared first in 2012 in V-Wars, the first of 4 anthologies, shared world anthologies, created and edited by Jonathan Maberry. It was also the basis of a comic book series that Jonathan wrote for IDW and a TV show starring Ian Somerhalder that aired on Netflix in 2019. This is part 2 of The Ballad of Big Charlie. Chapter 8. Mia Fitzsimmons sat in the press area for the debate between Mickey Solano and Hugues Charles. Normally, this sort of event would have a press section of about a dozen seats, and Mia would have had her choice of them, as maybe half would be filled. But thanks to the Reverend Man and his sermon, which Mia had now heard exactly 200 times, she'd been counting for no reason except perhaps so she could have a proper measurement for her suffering, the size of the press area was tripled, and it was packed. She was squeezed between Josh, an overweight reporter from an Iowa paper. Our readers want to know who the Reverend was talking about, and hey, I'll take this free trip to the Big Apple. And an overweight blogger, whose name she never got, who'd been writing about I-1V1. She had no idea how the latter managed to score press credentials. And that was just journalists. Camera operators were all over the place, with lights blinding anyone who looked anywhere near an aisle. To her annoyance, Jack Napolitano, now working for RSN, had been chosen to moderate. To her surprise, they didn't provide an extra chair for his ego. The debate had been going well, and the Iowa reporter was getting cranky at the lack of a mention of Reverend Man. The next question, Jack read off an index card, this was still the Bronx, and the teleprompter was not in the budget, is about the death penalty. Mr. Solano, you're in favor of reinstating it in New York State, and Mr. Charles, you've been very much set against it. Mr. Solano, can you explain your position? Solano smiled. He was dressed in a dark maroon suit. Be happy to. When the Court of Appeals declared the death penalty law unconstitutional, they took a bullet out of every prosecutor's gun. The death penalty is absolutely a last resort, one that should be reserved for the most heinous of crimes, but it needs to be available for those. Now, Mr. Charles has never called for the death penalty, even though he had opportunities to do so while the law was still on the books. And you know what? I agree with him. There weren't any cases that came up in the Bronx during that time that called for the death penalty. Points for Solano on that one. Mia jotted down a few notes. But I maintain that to rob prosecutors of that as a possible sentence robs them of the ability to do their job. And I have continued to lobby the Court of Appeals to reverse its decision. Having said that, if I am elected, I will, of course, abide by the law. Mia snorted. Stuck the landing there, Mick. Jack looked over at Big Charlie, wearing a tailored charcoal pinstripe suit. Mr. Charles, there are no cases where the death penalty is called for. And there's the soundbite. Mia jotted down the line in her notebook. Yes, you may provide historic examples like Adolf Hitler or Osama bin Laden. But these are not people who would ever be prosecuted at the Bronx County Courthouse. But of all the arguments to be made against the death penalty, none are more compelling than the simple fact that innocent people have been found guilty of capital crimes. It is bad enough when the state condemns one of its citizens to death, but it is unconscionable that the state would do so to an innocent person. As for Mr. Solano's argument, prosecutors have dozens of options of punishments that fit the crime. The idea that the death penalty would cripple prosecutors in their jobs when Mr. Solano himself admits that it would be not used very often as well is ludicrous. And there's the other soundbite. This time there were cheers. Jack whirled around to glare at the audience as if their cheers were a personal affront. Then he read the next question off the index cards. The Reverend Josiah Mann recently said during one of his sermons that Mr. Charles should not be permitted to live due to his suffering from I-1V1. Mr. Charles, how do you respond to such a threat to your life? Next to Mia, Josh sat up in his chair, fingers hovering over his laptop. I do not believe any threat to my life was made. The Reverend Man is a devout, dedicated man of God, and I do not wish him any ill will. He has said many things I disagreed with before last Sunday, and I dare say he will say more things I disagree with after this. He is welcome to his opinion, as are his followers. Since very few of them reside in the Bronx, I am confident that they will not be voting in September or in November, so my concern for his effect upon my chances are minimal. Ooh, burn, Josh muttered. Well, he's right, Mia said. Oh, not complaining. Man's poison. I can't wait to tell my grandkids that I was there when he got put in his place by a werewolf. Mr. Solano? Jack prompted. Mr. Charles is far more generous to the Reverend Man than I am. Yeah, there are people out there suffering from I1V1 who are causing harm, and yes, those people are dangerous. But not everyone has decided to channel Count Dracula and suck people's blood. Some of them, most of them, are just people who are trying to go on with their lives. Mr. Charles is one of them, and he should be respected for that, not condemned. Anyone who does condemn him for that isn't a man of any god I'm familiar with. Reverend Man is a rabble-rouser and a scumbucket. If he ever does come to the Bronx, he'll find out how we treat those kind of people. More cheers followed that, and Josh grinned. My grandkids are going to get a great story once they exist. Again, Jack impatiently waited for the cheers to die down. The next question is for Mr. Solano. Are you concerned that your opponent has publicly stated that he is a werewolf, and that part of why you're running against him is to prevent a self-described monster from running the prosecutions of this county? Solano actually rolled his eyes. Let me ask you something. If Mr. Charles had come out as a homosexual, would you even ask the question? I'm running for Bronx District Attorney because I think it's time for new blood in that office after 12 years. I think it's time for Mr. Charles to step down and give way for a different vision, one that can build on what he's accomplished. I think the DA's office has become ossified, and that I'm the man to apply the rust off. That has nothing to do with whether or not my friend over there has a disease that allows him to change into a loup-garou. Mia shook her head. It almost didn't matter what Big Charlie said in response. Solano just had to support him before tearing him down. It made him seem noble, but she didn't think that was going to be enough. The blogger to her right was just muttering, awesome, totally fucking awesome, to himself as he made notes on his tablet. Chapter 9. Transcript of the On the Street segment of Good Morning NYC. Today's On the Street asks the people of New York the question, should Big Charlie be elected Bronx DA even though he's one of the many people suffering from I1V1? All I know is I can walk home at night without feeling like I'm getting jumped by no crazy man, and it's been that way since he'd been DA. I don't care what he turns into. He's getting my vote for damn sure. You kidding me? Guy's a freaking werewolf. I ain't voted for him before, but I sure as hell am voting for him now. That's who I want a murderer looking at in a courtroom, know what I mean? Oh God, no. Never. I mean, I don't vote or anything, but if I did, I would never vote for one of those people. Not ever. Not only am I not voting for him, I have given money to Solano, and I can't stand Solano. But seriously, the man is no longer even human. How can he enforce human laws when they no longer even apply to him? Christ knows I have no respect for that man guy, but he was right on the nose with that one. He ain't Big Charlie anymore. He's a monster, and he needs to be put down. You know, he's the best beeping DA this town's ever seen, yo. He ain't he ain't even turned into no werewolf that nobody saw. So to hell with that. I'd be voting for him as soon as I register him. I admire him for coming out and telling the truth. God, I wish more politicians would do that. They spend so much time saying nothing that they don't say anything. This is a guy who came out and told everyone what happened to him. He didn't wait for a reporter or an internet video or a police investigation to say, oh yeah, didn't I mention I snort coke off call girls or whatever? He probably could have gone the whole year without telling nobody, but he did the right thing. For that alone, I'd vote for the guy. But it's got to wait till November because I'm an independent. Chapter 10. Oddly, Mia's second time on Helen Lashmar's show made her a lot more nervous than her first. The first time was so last minute, she didn't have the chance to get nervous. Now, though, she had the Bronx Zoo's entire butterfly conservatory in her stomach as she sat through makeup. Next to her was Hannah LaBeouf, a commanding African-American woman who was one of the ACLU's lawyers. You'll be fine, Hannah was saying. You're good on camera. Mia shrugged, which earned her a glare from the young man doing her makeup. I appreciate that. I'm just worried about man's guy. Tim Markinson, the public information officer for the Blessed Church of Enlightenment, was on the panel as well. They've just been... She trailed off, unable to form words to do justice to her annoyance at the shitstorm man's sermon had caused for Big Charlie. I'll take care of Markinson. He's an empty suit that does whatever he has to make sure the donations keep coming. Thanks. The fourth panelist was Senator Alex Kapsis, whom Mia had met several times. So that's 2 friendly faces at least. Within a few minutes, they were seated around the table, cameras all around, lights shining brightly in her face. On the monitors in front of her, the closing credits from the previous show were running. The host had yet to arrive, but the other 3 panelists were present. Markinson wore a light blue suit that made him look like he was taking someone to the prom in 1952. Senator Kapsis looked like a college professor in his tweed jacket and was on his cell phone. 1 minute there! Somebody bellowed, and the butterflies started flapping their wings so hard in Mia's stomach she was sure they were changing history so the dinosaurs didn't die. Last time, a PA had yelled at John Generico for talking on his cell phone in the studio. But he was an asshole, and Kapsis was a U.S. senator, so the rules were probably different. But when Helen Lashmar stormed in, staring intently at her smartphone as she walked, she said, "Okay, let's get this party started," which was apparently what she always said before the show began. In 5, 4, 3. The assistant director then held up 2 fingers, then 1, then pointed to Helen. Good morning. We start with our roundtable segment, where a panel will tackle the news of the day. Joining me are Mia Fitzsimmons of the New York Daily News, Timothy Markinson, the Public Information Officer for the Blessed Church of Enlightenment, ACLU lawyer Hannah LaBeouf, and Senator Alex Kapsis of New York. I1V1 has been all over the news lately, with the Reverend Man of the Blessed Church of Enlightenment calling for the death of Bronx District Attorney Hugues Charles, better known as Big Charlie, and the discovery that murdered Chicago talk show host Danica Dubov also suffered from I1V1. She shook her head and smiled. A werewolf running for public office and a vampire hosting a tabloid talk show. Helen was about to start a question when Markinson interrupted in a low, nasal tone. I'd like to object to your characterization of the Reverend Man's words, please, Helen. Of course, Timmy. Markinson barreled forward as if Helen hadn't spoken. The Reverend Man did not call for the death of Mr. Charles. The Reverend Man is a firm believer in the Word of God, and the very words of God as handed down to Moses were that people should not commit murder. The words of Exodus 22 state that one should not suffer a creature of magic to live among us. A good analogy would be what King Saul did in the first book of Samuel, driving all the necromancers and magicians from the kingdom of Israel. It required all of Mia's self-control not to let out an interjection on the air that RSN's broadcast standards and practices would not have been happy with. She had an entire bit on 1 Samuel ready to go, and this blue-suited Jesus freak just stole her thunder. When Saul contradicted his own order by consulting the Witch of Endor, he was condemned, and his army was soon defeated, leading to Saul's suicide. Mia's words all but exploded from her mouth. So what you're saying, Tim, is that we should kick Big Charlie out of New York and send him where exactly? He can no longer be in the community of God, and he must be removed from it as Saul did the magicians and the necromancers. The senator jumped in before Mia could respond. Interesting, Mr. Markinson. So now you're saying that the Bronx is part of the community of God? Because I recall the Reverend saying more than once, including after the September 11th attacks, that God had abandoned New York City. Given that, the Bronx would be the ideal place for someone you want to condemn to the same fate as the Witch of Endor. Unable to help herself, Mia smiled. Markinson looked nonplussed. All of America is part of the community of God, Senator. What the Reverend Man did in 2001 was express a fear that God had abandoned the city of New York. Now Mia rolled her eyes. So, is this what you do, Mr. Markinson? The Reverend says something inflammatory and crazy, and you go on TV and tell people, oh, he didn't really mean that. What he really meant was this. That's not at all fair, Mia, Markinson said in his most condescending tone. And you're Tim from now on, you self-righteous prick, she thought. The Reverend Man's words are often taken out of context by a biased media, and as public information officer, it's my job to clarify and explain when people misunderstand the Reverend's words. Hannah said, I can't speak for Mia here, but I've read the Reverend's words, Tim, every single one of them. Not once did he ever say cast out or remove from God's community, or any of the other phrases that you've been using non-stop since the video of his sermon hit YouTube. He was calling for Big Charlie's death. Are you saying the Reverend Man doesn't have the right to speak his mind? Markinson's condescension actually got worse, which Mia wouldn't have credited as possible a few seconds ago, because I would find that a fascinating position for a lawyer from the ACLU to take. Oh, I've got no problem with man speaking his mind, and I would defend his right to say it in court. But unless I am the one defending him, then I've got the right to say that he's full of it, and he's calling for the death of a good man. Of course, Senator Kapsis said, that raises the question of whether or not D.A. Charles is still that. A man, that is. Danica Dubov wasn't exactly what you'd call a paragon of journalism, but she wasn't a sadistic torturer either, at least until this virus got her and turned her into some kind of vampire. The Chicago police found dozens of people she'd been literally feeding off of for weeks. With all due respect to Mr. Markinson and the Reverend Man, concerns about whether or not D.A. Charles is part of God's community is of less immediacy than his place in the human community. Hannah shrugged. Well, the human community in his home city seems fine with him. His poll numbers have gone up since he announced that he was a loup-garou. And that's the point. This is a local election for a small part of one city. If that small group of people are okay with him, then I don't see the problem. Now hold on a minute, Hannah, Capsis said. We're not talking about a rural town with a few hundred people electing a sheriff. The Bronx has a population that is the same as that of the state of Alaska. And it's one-fifth of one of the most important cities in the entire world. With all due respect, Senator, Mia said, I don't see what difference that makes. If it was a little town in upstate, or if it is the Bronx, which, by the way, has twice the population of Alaska, the point is, it's up to those of us who live there to decide. It doesn't matter what we say or what some televangelist says. It's up to the people, and that's what matters. The Rev... Markinson started, but Helen interrupted. I have to cut you off, Tim. Markinson interrupted right back. The Reverend Man is not a televangelist, which is a term we find quite offensive. Sternly, Helen said, Tim, please. We have to take a break. When we come back, we'll take a look at the president's proposed new budget. Mia let out a long breath after the PA said, and we're out! Nice job, Hannah said with a smile. Looking over at Markinson, who looked like he'd eaten an entire lemon, Mia smiled and said, thanks. Chapter 11. Detective Hector Trujillo winced when he saw Mia Fitzsimmons from the news approach the crime scene. At the moment, she, like all the other reporters outside the Upper West Side apartment, where Senator Alex Capsis had a co-op, was behind the yellow crime scene tape. Two other news reporters were already there, reporting on the senator's murder, so Trujillo wasn't entirely sure what Fitzsimmons was doing there. Fitzsimmons was talking animatedly to Officer Nugent at the tape. Nugent looked like he wanted to haul off and belt the reporter, and Fitzsimmons looked like she wanted to do likewise. It's okay, Nugent, Trujillo said. Let her through. Nugent gave the detective a dubious expression, but waved her through. She ducked under the yellow tape and approached Trujillo. Saw you on TV, Fitzsimmons, he said as she walked up to him. Looking good. Thanks so much, Detective. God, it's been, 2 years? Sounds about right, Trujillo said neutrally. When I gave you that witness that let you close the Rojas case. Again, Trujillo said, sounds about right. He didn't want to commit to anything until the reporter laid her cards on the table. Of course, she said with a smile, I could have just sat on the witness and wrote the story, but no, I helped you out. You got promoted to second grade after that, didn't you, Detective? So she was calling in the favor. Can you stop fucking around and get to it, Fitzsimmons? I thought you'd never ask. She took out her digital recorder. Trujillo held up a hand. Hold up, I ain't saying nothing on the record. Fine. She dropped the recorder back in her purse. But can you tell me on the record that the senator was murdered? The ME ain't made it official, but the bastard was ripped to pieces by teeth. Looked as bad as Bellevue. Fitzsimmons nodded. Trujillo shuddered just from mentioning it. He'd gone to the academy with Detective Jerry Schmidt, and had attended his funeral after he was ripped to pieces by Michael Fane, the first vampire, at Bellevue Hospital. The reports he'd read of what happened when Jerry was killed were frighteningly similar to what the senator's living room looked like right now. But he wasn't about to share that with Fitzsimmons. He finally realized what she was doing here. She was on the Big Charlie beat. And when he last saw her on television, she was on with Senator Capsis talking about the DA. Okay, look, we got a guy running from the scene in custody now, the senator's nephew, Nate. Trujillo nodded. It wasn't exactly a secret that Nathan Capsis was a bad seed who had failed to appear for his day in court after he beat up his famous uncle. He's FDA for the assault charge last year. Senator's wife said they ain't even heard from the fucker in a year. And he's got I-1V1? Looks like. Luther Swan said he's a Virculatios? Gesundheit. Trujillo attempted a smile, but it didn't entirely work. And yeah, I guess that's how you pronounce it. I got it in a text from Swan. Yeah, makes sense. Cannibalistic. Greek. Trujillo didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to close the case with a minimum of fuss. And as far as he was concerned, this was a dunker. The nephew did it. The only problem was the press angle, especially with the primary tomorrow. But at least now he had a way to repay Fitzsimmons. A paddy wagon had pulled up, and two of the uniforms were leading a handcuffed Nate Capsis to it. He was a skinny kid, with the muscle tone of a string bean. Trujillo stared down at Fitzsimmons. "We done here?" "You said the senator was torn to pieces?" After Trujillo nodded, Fitzsimmons went on. "So how'd that little guy manage it?" Shrugging, Trujillo said, "He's a vampire. Thought they were all super strong and shit." Fitzsimmons shook her head. "Not a Vircolatios. They feast off family." "What, like that TV bitch in Chicago?" "Yeah." Fitzsimmons let out a breath. "It's possible that Nate came at the senator and chowed down, but he doesn't have the strength to..." Trujillo held up both hands. "I don't want to hear it. I got me a dunker here, and you ain't fucking it up for me. The nephew did it. He's got the vamp disease. He's got a grudge against his uncle, and he's already a fugitive. It fits, and we ain't complicating this. Now, we even for Rojas?" "Sure." But Fitzsimmons barely seemed to pay attention to Trujillo. "It would need someone with a huge body mass to do something like that," she muttered. For his part, Trujillo didn't give a rat's ass. He had his killer in bracelets, he had a closed case to put under his name, and he no longer owed a reporter a favor. As far as he was concerned, it was a good night. Chapter 12. Transcript of the On the Street segment of Good Morning NYC. Today's On the Street comes from last night's Democratic primary for Bronx DA, as we asked people coming out of 3 different polling places in Riverdale, Morrisania, and Edenwald who they voted for and why. From Riverdale. "I'm sorry, but it's not any of your business that I voted for Big Charlie." Morrisania. "I ain't voting for no werewolf, that's for damn sure. Solano all the way!" Edenwald. "I grew up with Big Charlie. He's a good man, the best. I don't care if he turns into the Wicked Witch of the West. He's a good man. I vote for good men." Riverdale. "Oh gosh, I just had to vote for Solano. I don't trust Charles, you know? The whole virus thing, it's just yucky." Morrisania. "So he's a werewolf? So what? Woman turns into a monster from hell once a month, and I'd vote for a woman DA, so why not vote for Big Charlie? Know what I'm saying?" Edenwald. "You only be caring because he's a loop guru. He ain't no loop guru. Nobody even be giving no bleep if he was just being Big Charlie running for office again. I voted for him 3 times, and didn't nobody come out to be asking me who I voted for with no news cameras then. Now, did they?" Excuse me. Chapter 13. Mia Fitzsimmons was sitting in the Daily News City Room, writing up her story on Big Charlie's victory. It wasn't official yet, but the early exit polls made it look like Hugues Charles would win the primary in a walk over Mickey Solano. Bart Mosby, her editor, walked up to her. "Looks like the guy's gonna do it." "He's not my guy, Bart. Bullshit. Just make sure the big guy remembers how far up his ass your face was during this campaign." Mia made a face. "Bart, seriously." "I am serious. This vampire shit meant he was good copy. And now the DA owes one of my reporters a favor. And with Capsis' murder, it makes even better copy. People are eating this vampire shit up." "Yeah." Mia was looking over the ME's initial report on Capsis' murder. It was fast-tracked since he was a U.S. Senator. And Mia had a friend in the medical examiner's office. And frowning. "It's funny, I thought it might hurt Big Charlie, but it didn't." "What would?" "Oh, the murder. I mean, it was obvious that someone with I1V1 killed him." "Yeah, the nephew." Mia shook her head. "I don't think so. He's a Vircolatios. They just feed. They don't murder. Certainly not like that. He doesn't have the strength to tear him apart like that, and the ME's report says there were both teeth and what looks like claw marks." "Who gives a fuck?" Bart asked. "He's a vampire. They can do that shit. Whatever. I'm gonna go get a cigarette." Worst day in the history of the world was when the rest of Bart's harangue was lost to distance, though Mia had heard his railing against the laws that prevented indoor smoking since her first day in the city room, but she wasn't paying much attention. Nate Capsis didn't have claws. Something here didn't add up. On the TV, Big Charlie was being questioned about the senator's murder outside his campaign headquarters. "Nathan Capsis has always been a very troubled man. His violent tendencies go back many years." "Yes," one reporter was saying off camera, "but he's never killed. Do you believe that contracting I1V1 made him..." "As I said," and now Big Charlie was sounding testy, "he was always a troubled young man. I1V1 did not change that. Recall, if you will, that he had failed to appear before the court in answer to an assault charge on the senator." "But Senator Capsis wasn't exactly your best friend," said the same reporter, and Mia was wondering who it was now. The senator and I were friends for many years. Mia winced. That sounded rehearsed. But he threw you under the bus on Helen Lashmar's show the other day. Do you think... Judy Alejo stepped in at that point and cut the questions off. Capsis certainly hadn't sounded much like a friend to Big Charlie on Lashmar. Could that have been seen as a betrayal? She finished writing up her notes, both for the piece that would be in tomorrow's news and for the story about Big Charlie that she was finding herself composing in light of the senator's murder as the night wore on. Eventually, Bart wandered by and said the news story was in the queue. Curious, Mia called it up on her laptop. Big Charlie won 63% of the vote, and the turnout was 70% of the registered Democrats in the Bronx. Mia wasn't sure, but she was fairly certain those were both records. Now it's just the election, she muttered. Bart laughed. Right! Are the Republicans even running anybody? No, Mia said, but Escobar's going to be on the ticket. Who's that? The Right to Life candidate. Hell, Big Charlie's going to be on the conservative ticket, along with Liberal and Green. Right, so the election's going to matter. Bart snorted and walked off. It will matter if Big Charlie can't run to being in jail for murder. It was a crazy thought. Mia had spent most of the last 4 months around Hugues Charles, and he didn't have a murderous bone in his body. But neither had Nate Capsis. Hell, neither had Danica Dubov or Michael Fain. Maybe there's no story here, but I have to play out the string in case there is one. Luckily, Bart wouldn't have had any problem with her sticking close to the DA's office moving forward. Chapter 14. Op-ed piece by Mia Fitzsimmons in the New York Daily News. It started with Michael Fain here in New York. It's gotten far, far worse. In Los Angeles, a Laker girl was attacked by an ape-like man who seemed to suck the very life out of her. In Chicago, a TV personality named Danica Dubov kept victims in her home, while Illinois State Representative William Blevins and his wife were horribly murdered. In Paris, a massacre beneath the City of Light's very streets. And here in New York, Anson Morris slaughtering his wife and best friend. It's become impossible to turn on the news or read a paper like this one without there being some new vampire on the scene. 1 year ago, Hugues Charles was sworn in to serve his 4th term as District Attorney of the Bronx. A year and a half ago, he won the Democratic primary, as well as a virtually uncontested general election, despite having revealed himself to be a loup-garou. It would be hard to imagine Big Charlie succeeding in such an endeavor now. The lines are being drawn, human versus vampire, and there's no real clear notion as to who will win. Big Charlie knows which side he's on, though. In a press conference held on the first day of the Anson Morris trial, the Bronx DA said, "It does not matter that I am a loup-garou, for the same reasons that it does not matter that I have dark skin, or that my mother was born in Port-au-Prince. What matters is that I was elected by the people of this county to prosecute criminals. Anson Morris is a criminal. It also does not matter that he has claws and fangs, and that he did not have 2 years ago. What matters is that he committed a heinous crime, and he will be punished for that." The surety in Big Charlie's voice makes him a lone voice in the wilderness these days. Violence committed by people with I-1V1 has skyrocketed, and it's been followed by increased violence committed against them, what one pundit referred to as preventative self-defense. So far, Big Charlie has stayed above the fray. The question is, how long can he remain there? His response when I asked him that very thing was typically candid. "There is no fray to remain above. I am here to do my job. It is the same job I have done for 12 years, and I intend to do for another 4 at least." That surprised me, as I recalled lots of talk about this being his final term. I do not wish to make predictions. 4 years ago, I could not have imagined the circumstances that we face now. My presence as a prosecutor in a major city might well be important for people to see. Those of us who suffer from this virus, those peoples that have been dubbed the vampires, we are all simply people. So many barriers against prejudice have been broken in the last 50 years. Civil rights, gay marriage, an African-American president. But now we have found another group of people to oppress. Of course, the big question is what Big Charlie will do if the proposed Vampire Registration Act, currently on the Senate floor, passes. One of the bill's sponsors, is Senator Emily Krasnicki, who was appointed to serve out Senator Alex Kapsis's term after his murder. My job as district attorney is to prosecute to the full extent of the law. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of the County of the Bronx, the City of New York, the State of New York, and the Republic of the United States of America. If someone in my county is in violation of any of the laws under which we live, then they shall be prosecuted by my office. More thorny is the death penalty, which has been off the books in New York State since 2004. There's talk in Albany of bringing it back solely for I-1v1 cases. Again, my job as district attorney is to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. I can say that personally, I am not comfortable with any legal decisions that discriminates against a particular group of people. Imagine if the governor proposed a law that stated that only black people could receive the death penalty, or only Jews could. It would never even be considered. But Big Charlie won't let ideology stand in the way of doing his job. If it is put into laws and if it's appropriate, I will prosecute with the death penalty in mind. But that decision will have little to do with the virus and everything to do with whether or not that punishment fits the crime. Let's hope that the state legislature's object will be similarly all sublime. Chapter 15. Burrell Grinberg honestly did not expect to ever be walking into Hugues Charles' office in the Bronx County Courthouse again. Big Charlie was on the phone, but he gestured for her to take a seat in the guest seat while he spoke. There was a lot of legalese flying back and forth that Burrell didn't even pretend to understand. Finally, he said, "Thank you, Amelia," and hung up. "My apologies, Burrell." "No problem," Burrell said neutrally. "How are you doing?" Small talk first, then. "Keeping busy. I've been doing some consulting and some writing. Actually, a bunch of publishers have been approaching me about writing a book about getting you reelected. Just in general, that's enhanced my resume." "I'm very glad to hear that, Burrell, because I wish to hire you again." Burrell frowned. "The next DA race isn't for 3 years. Not for district attorney. You are aware, of course, that Emily Krasnicki has declined to run for a full term, so Alex's seat is open. I would like to throw my hat into the ring, as it were, and I wish you to run my campaign." Pulling her cardigan tightly around her chest, Burrell took a deep breath before replying. "Are you out of your fucking mind?" Big Charlie recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "Not at all. I believe that with my own profile increasing, this might be an ideal time." "It is not an ideal time! It's the worst time in the history of the universe for you to be running for dog catcher, much less U.S. Senator. If you run, you will be absolutely destroyed. Remember what happened with the Reverend Man? Picture that Michigas every single day. Public opinion on Vance is going down the drain with every passing day, and if you try to run, you will be ruined. Hell, they'll probably force you to resign. People with I-1v1 are getting lynched out there, Huge." For several seconds, Big Charlie didn't say anything. His huge hands were folded together, elbows resting on his metal desk, staring at an indeterminate point to Burrell's left. "I appreciate your honesty, Burrell. It is the quality of yours that I always admired most." "Thank you. So you won't do it?" "I have not decided yet. In truth, I had not decided when I asked you that you will not be willing to represent me." "I didn't say that." Burrell spoke without thinking. She liked Big Charlie. She generally made it a rule not to like or dislike the people she worked for, but the prosecutor was such a teddy bear it was impossible to think ill of him, and she didn't want to disappoint him. But after mulling it over for half a second, she realized she had to. "But I'm saying it now. It won't just be career suicide for you. It'll taint everyone who works for you. Don't do it." There was some more small talk after that, and then Burrell shook Big Charlie's enormous hand and left the office. She figured that would be the end of it. He had almost always taken her advice, and whenever he hadn't, he'd regretted it right afterward. So she was stunned to hear the following as she watched Good Morning NYC over her morning tea. "Our top story on the hour. Big Charlie is running for Senate." "You have got to be fucking kidding me." Burrell immediately opened up her laptop and started composing an email to Big Charlie that boiled down "What the fuck is wrong with you, you schmuck?" The man himself showed up on her screen as she frantically typed. "There has been an increasing call for more legislation against those of us who have contracted I-1v1, and I believe it is past time that those of us who have the virus have a say in how that legislation is crafted. Senator Kapsis lost his life to a family member who had the virus, and my announcement today is by way of reminding people that we are not monsters. We are people. Senator Caps's nephew was violent before he contracted the virus, and I was a district attorney before I contracted the virus. I believe that I will be able to represent my home state in Washington, regardless of whether or not I can alter my shape into a wolfen form. Fairies will come flying out of my ass, Burrell muttered. Big Charlie's heart was in the right place, and nothing he said there was wrong. She made a mental note to send a well-done email to Judy Alejo for that statement. It was very well put together. But it wouldn't do a lick of good. Nobody was going to vote a vampire into office. State Comptroller Frank Vandermeer has already announced that he'll be running for the seat on the Republican side, but Big Charlie will have to survive a Democratic primary that already includes former New York City Mayor Aaron Barr, Manhattan Borough President Emma Jaffe, and State Senator Diane Axisa. Ought to be a fun race. The one piece of good news was that no one on that list was going to scare anyone from running. Barr was far from the city's most popular mayor, a one-term wonder who created almost no impression, and Jaffe, Axisa, and Vandermeer were bland career politicians who had almost no profile. Were it not for I-1V1, Big Charlie could take the election in a walk. As she was typing her poison pen letter to the DA, she got a notification of a new email. It was from Mickey Solano. Burrell frowned and clicked on the icon to open that mail. Then she decided she was going to need another cup of tea, possibly with some whiskey in it. Chapter 16. Transcript of a commercial paid for by Citizens for Humanity. By the people, for the people. This great country has always been about its people. But now it's in danger from creatures who may look like people, who may even sometimes appear to be people, but they aren't. Sadistic, brutal, vicious killers, with more of them every day. And one of them is running for Senate. They call him Big Charlie, but what they should be calling him is a monster. And he'll bring the monster's agenda to Capitol Hill. Don't let this happen. Let our country be for us, not the monsters who scare our children, who scare us. Make sure that when you vote for senator, you don't vote for Hugues Charles. Paid for by Citizens for Humanity. Chapter 17. Judy Alejo was on the phone with her sister when Helen Lashmar came on. So busy had she been with organizing interviews with Big Charlie that she hadn't even checked to see what she'd be doing, and hadn't actually spoken to her sister in almost a month. Not that it was a bad thing from Judy's perspective, but now Perla was complaining to Mommy about it. So Judy called her and ignored the roundtable segment on Lashmar to listen to her carry on about how wonderful her children were. Just as she was about to bang her head into the desk, she caught Lashmar say their candidate threw his hat into the ring, Mickey Solano, who was Big Charlie's opponent in his latest re-election as Bronx DA. Perla, I've got to go. Without waiting to hear her sister's objection, Judy hit end on her phone and dropped it on her couch while grabbing for the cable remote. Grateful for DVR technology, she rewound. Lashmar was sitting at a desk with the I-1V1 logo that RSN had been using for all their news stories on the Vamp Sitch, as the vice president had insisted on calling it. Dozens of Senate races starting to heat up. Probably the one with the most heat is for junior senator of New York. The hottest of the hot-button issues is the vamp virus, I-1V1, and the New York race has made it white-hot with the candidacy of Hugues Charles, an admitted vamp. Known as Big Charlie, the current Bronx District Attorney has joined a wide field of Democratic candidates to replace Senator Emily Krasnicki. Today that race took on a big turn when another candidate threw his hat into the ring, Mickey Solano, who was Big Charlie's opponent in his latest re-election as Bronx DA. Cursing, Judy leapt from the couch to find her laptop. The camera angle changed to one that had Solano's smug face on a screen while Lashmar turned to look at him. We've got him here via satellite to talk with us this morning. Thanks for coming on, Mickey. It's my pleasure, Helen. Yeah, I'll bet it is. She found her laptop on her dining room table and opened it. This is your second run at Big Charlie in 2 years. What makes you think that this time will be different? I'm an even bigger asshole, Judy thought uncharitably as she impatiently waited for the laptop to start back up. It's only been a year, but the world has changed a lot in that year, Helen. The vampires are a real problem, and we can't just nod our heads and say they're just victims. It's time to get tough. Honestly, Charlie's doing a great job in the Bronx, and that's where he belongs. Let him stay in the community he's been such a big part of, and leave the legislation to the rest of us. I was right, he is a bigger asshole. He didn't used to be this patronizing. Her laptop finally came back online and found her apartment's wireless network. She started a new email message to Big Charlie. Now, you've hired Burrell Grinberg as your campaign manager, and she ran Big Charlie's winning campaign against you. What? Judy rewound the DVR again to make sure she heard that right. Hired Burrell Grinberg as your campaign manager, and she ran that bitch! Judy had always liked Burrell, and she couldn't believe she'd stabbed them in the back like that. Hey, I was just happy she was available. Solano droned on, and Judy got more and more livid. She knew that Burrell had specifically advised Big Charlie against running again, and now she wondered if that sage advice had come before or after she'd been hired by Solano. She finished composing the email, and then realized she needed to talk directly to Big Charlie. Solano was droning on as she grabbed her phone. Can't help but be an advocate for the vampires, and that's not what we need. We need objectivity. Charlie's been on the front lines of it, both as a victim and as a prosecutor. Hell, a third of the criminal trials in the Bronx in the last 9 months have been vampire-related, and a quarter of the civil ones. Judy shouted at the screen, the DA doesn't handle civil cases, you dumb fuck! Big Charlie's voicemail came on. With a sigh, Judy waited for the beep. It's Judy. Call me back the minute you get this. Not part of the machine. I am part of the community. Mayor Barr, Emma and Diane, they're part of the system, and that system ain't working. Oh, sweet Jesus, he's not pulling that shit, is he? Judy went back to her laptop to finish the email, in case Big Charlie checked that before his voicemail. Solano went on. Humanity's at war with itself right now, and we need people who can step up. I've always stepped up when it matters, when the people of New York have needed me, both as a lawyer and as an activist. And honestly, what I said about Charlie applies to the others too, in that they're too close. They're part of the problem, so they don't see the solution. I can bring fresh eyes that have seen the reality of what the world is turning into. Judy hit send on the email she'd composed before trying to call, and then leaned back on her couch. In truth, she had always been against Big Charlie running for senator. Before I-1v1, she had figured he'd be gunning for it when his seat came open, but now it was madness. But she also believed that he could do some good, so it was worth a shot. She just hoped that she wasn't fooling herself. Or him. Chapter 18. Mia Fitzsimmons thought that Jack Napolitano was going to crawl out of his own skin. Can you believe that snake in the grass is the one moderating? He shook his perfectly coiffed head. That was my racket. Mia tried to ignore him, all the while cursing whoever sat the two of them next to each other in the press area. The debate among Democratic candidates for senator was being held at Fordham University, and campus security had insisted on assigned seats for the press, and indeed for everyone else, as Big Charlie's presence on the dais led to some serious security concerns. Jack had said that between every question, and Mia swore that the next time she was going to kick him. Either that, or ask how she qualified as a snake in the grass when he was the one who took her job when she was promoted. The moderator he was complaining about was Yuki Natobi, who had been asked to moderate by several of the candidates, though notably not Big Charlie. Mia figured they were hoping that having the journalist who broke the I-1v1 story do the moderating would have people talking about vampires even more, thus focusing more animus on Big Charlie. The sad thing was, it would probably work. Mayor Barr, Natobi said, the next question is for you. Do you feel that the most important legislative agenda before Congress in the coming months will be legislation against the I-1v1 virus? Absolutely, Barr said without hesitation. This virus is producing people who are running roughshod over not just laws, but morality. Barr started doing the cup your thumb in your index finger method of pointing that politicians kept doing because somebody told them it made them look forceful. Mia was looking forward to the day when someone figured out that whoever told them that was wrong. Plus, they have abilities that were never accounted for in current jurisprudence, Barr added. Now, I'm not saying people should be rounded up or anything crazy like that. I'm talking solely about the vampires who have committed crimes. We need to come up with different punishments and different methods for arresting, incarcerating, and prosecuting that small percentage of those who do commit crimes. As with every question, that resulted in applause. Jack started to make a comment, but Mia just glared at him, and he climbed up. Natobi waited for the applause to die down. The next question is for President Jaffe. What would your response to a vampire who Big Charlie then cut in, which was a breach in protocol? All the journalists around Mia sat up. Excuse me, but I am afraid I must interrupt. That is the fifth question in a row that has dealt with I-1v1. One would think that a United States Senator had little else to deal with in his or her day-to-day life than legislating against those of us who suffer from the virus. Natobi looked positively nonplussed, but before she could say anything, Emma Jaffe, the sitting Manhattan Borough President, said, "Oh, come on, Charlie. Do you really think it's not an important issue? Vampires have been running rampant with no control, and it's been worse in the big cities. The world takes its lead from New York, and we need to provide that leadership." Mia snorted, since that was probably Jaffe's already prepared answer to that question. Diane Axisa, a state senator, jumped in. "I think Charlie raises a good point. There's a budget crisis. We don't have enough jobs or true national health care. There's a serious allocation and tax issues facing this country, and we spent all our time in this debate talking about one issue. Yes, it's an important issue, but it's hardly the only one." Wow, 2 voices of reason. Mia jotted down notes. One more than I was expecting. Solano got that annoying smile of his. "I gotta say, Charlie, I think it's kind of disingenuous for you to complain, since the only reason you're running is because you can turn yourself into a werewolf." "My reasons for running are many, Mickey, but the primary one that I want to make sure that those of us who suffer from this virus are given a voice in government." He pointed at the 2 female candidates. "It was less than 100 years ago that Diane and Emma could not even vote for a state representative in Washington, much less attempt to become one. It took almost a century and a half for women to achieve that right. I fear that achieving similar rights for my own kind may take as long, and that is simply not acceptable." A gasp passed through the room. Solano put voice to what everyone was suddenly thinking. "That sounded like a threat, Charlie, and having I-1v1 doesn't exactly take away your right to vote." Big Charlie was sounding more intense, angry, than Mia had ever heard him. His voice was tighter and tenser than usual. "I have spoken with many who have faced problems, especially those who have had their appearance changed by the virus. They no longer match the visage that appears on their driver's license or their passport and are denied simple rights, and not just the right to vote. We do require new legislation, it is true, but Aaron's solution focuses far too much on the negative, and not enough on the positive. We need to take charge of our own destiny, and not let it be defined by others." The applause that generated was much more subdued and guarded than that of the previous candidates. Chapter 18. Emma Jaffe lay in her bed. The television was on, and her laptop was open, but she wasn't paying particularly close attention to either one. It had been an exhausting day, the latest in a series. Her staff was handling most of the day-to-day of running the borough of Manhattan, which was good, because this campaign was taking up all of her spare time. Any other time, a Senate race wouldn't be this brutal, but D.A. Charles had made it into a huge story. She was spending more time on camera than she ever imagined she would. On the other hand, it was publicity you couldn't buy. People all over the country were talking about her. Even if she didn't win the race, she had recognition now, and could parlay that into something much bigger. If senator didn't work, there was always mayor next year. She looked to the empty half of the bed. "Could have been part of this, Steve." But then her career had taken off since the divorce, so maybe he couldn't have been. Maybe he really had been holding her back. The TV went to commercial, and a deep voice said, "Michael Fane, Ensign Morris, Nathan Kapsis. What do they all have in common? They're all New Yorkers, they're all vampires, and they're all killers." She grabbed for the remote and turned the volume up. She and her staff had gone round and round over this ad. Even once they finally agreed to film it, finding the right voice had been hard. Her initial thought had been for a gentle female voice, but her campaign manager had convinced her that the deep, scratchy male voice was the way to go. Nathan Kapsis murdered his uncle, Senator Alex Kapsis, and now another killer just like him wants to take his seat. You wouldn't let the fox into the henhouse, so why should we let a vampire into Congress? Whatever you do next Tuesday, don't vote for Hugues Charles for Senate. Vote life, not death. Then her own voice. "I'm Emma Jaffe, and I approve this message." The key, of course, was that last line in the ad. Vote life, not death, was the point she'd been hammering home on the rest of her interviews for the next week. Fear was her best weapon right now. A crack startled her, echoing throughout her apartment. "Hello?" Steve had taken the dog with him when he left her, so the apartment was empty. She threw the covers aside, pulled her bathrobe tighter around her waist, and cautiously walked toward the doorway. She left the bedroom door open, generally. A familiar clack-clack echoed through the apartment. Paws on hardwood. But she hadn't heard it since Steve took Muttley. Then the clacking got faster, and Emma's heartbeat did likewise. "Who's there?" A shape formed in the darkness of the hallway, coalescing into a giant, four-legged, hairy creature, breathing heavily and moving toward her. Her heart pounded into her ribs. She realized that using fear against Big Charlie was a weapon that worked both ways. A second later, the shape leapt toward her, and she screamed. Chapter 20. Transcript of the On the Street segment of Good Morning NYC. Today's On the Street is about the Senate race currently playing out as we went to Grand Central and asked commuters who they would be voting for. Yo, I'm actually from the Bronx, and I voted for Big Charlie every time he ran, but no way I'm voting for that mother beeper now. Honestly, I've gone to every candidate's website and read over their platform. Vandermeer's right out. The man's living in the 50s, honestly. Barr never impressed me when he was mayor, and his campaign feels like a desperate attempt to remind everyone he's alive, you know? Solano's just a scuzzball lawyer, and Jaffe and Axis are okay, I guess, but they don't even seem to have much substance. I'll probably vote for one of them, honestly. The only candidate I find myself liking and agreeing with is Big Charlie, but of course I can't vote for that. That'd be crazy. I'd sooner vote for the love child of Manson and the son of Sam than I would that werewolf guy from the Bronx, I'll tell you that for free. I'm kind of torn between Vandermeer and Big Charlie. Vandermeer because he actually knows how to get beep done. Big Charlie because it would just be awesome to have a real-life werewolf in Congress. Well, you can probably guess from my white hair and claws that I've got I-1V1. I'm actually a registered Republican, so I can't vote in the Democratic primary, which is too bad, because I think it's great that Big Charlie is trying to represent us in Congress. It's about damn time, if you ask me. Solano, mostly, because I wish I'd voted him for DA last year. Jesus, the way Big Charlie's been. It's like he's been a totally different person. Did you hear him in the debate? Oh, I didn't see it. But I read what people were saying about it afterward, and it sounds like he wants to lead a revolution or something. Definitely Solano. Should have paid attention to him before. That's the end of part 2. Tune in Friday for part 3, the conclusion of The Ballad of Big Charlie, which should be available online from IDW. It's available in hardcover and paperback, and ebook also. And there are 3 subsequent volumes, one of which is called Streets of Fire, which I have another story in which also features Mia Fitzsimmons. You can check me out online at DeCandido.net, my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com, and if you'd like, it would be wonderful if you could support me on Patreon. There's all sorts of cool stuff there, including TV reviews, movie reviews, cat pictures, vignettes featuring my original characters, and bits and pieces from my various works in progress. Again, thank you. Keep watching, and please, stay safe.